Pati Christum et resurgere amor tuis edita intrare in gloriam suam. Now, the will of him who sent me is that I should lose nothing of all that he has given to me, and that I should raise it up on the last day. This is the regard of the good pastor. One atom of an eternal being is worth eternity, for to lose a soul is a terrible, 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 irreversible tragedy. Also, to lose a vocation is not indifferent, and the care that one needs to foster, care and love into being a vocation is something very onerous as regards the consequences that the person who doesn't do it bears before his king, in whose name he is acting. The story is told of John Paul II. Now, St. John Paul II, who years ago saw somebody apparently in the gutter. He wanted to know what his story was, for he was close to where the Holy Father was himself. So he got talking, and it turned out that the man was, in theory, a priest who had left the priesthood years previously. By a nudge of the Holy Spirit, surely, the Holy Father immediately turned to him and asked him if he would hear his confession. That was his return to vocation, and of course with a certain oomph. All because of a word received from the Holy Spirit, and a word which hit hard at the right time. On the contrary, many a vocation, and therefore the direction of many an eternity, can be misfired and mishandled by incompetence. A wounding word at the wrong time from a major superior, or whatever it might be, can bear a huge consequence of responsibility before God. Care, a vocation, and indeed an eternity is a delicate plant. We have in the first reading a conclusion which says it all. There was great rejoicing in that town as a result. It is the invasion of grace and therefore healing on every level of the gospel and its power to a region. In this case it is Philip who is preaching and going around. Coming back to that question, the responsibility that one bears. Normally, joy is the sign that God is present. A church or a prayer group which does not radiate joy and therefore healing has a question mark over it. If not, why not? I remember hearing, or actually reading this in an Irish Catholic paper, I believe. They had interviewed different people, including young people in a Norbertine community in America, in California. People actually with whom I'd studied at Rome, because we were living in the same place. And they wanted to know why this one or that one had entered there, because it was a community which was bursting at the seams. And this gentleman simply answered, I found that there was joy here, and I wanted it. If one comes out of an assembly, out of a celebration, out of a prayer meeting, hurt and not healed and given joy, then there's something seriously the matter. And the maximum of that kind of thing is when one is handling the sacrament of love, of which the Gospel speaks, the bread of life, but not in a spirit of joy and healing. Cardinal Orinzi, who was until a few years ago head of the Congregation for the Discipline of the Sacraments, and therefore the person who is responsible for all that goes wrong, that is correcting them, throughout the Church in the Vatican, had this remark to say on this kind of issue. For instance, people who might be refused communion because they wanted it received in a certain way and not another, and found that they were being badly treated. He just simply said they must go away in peace and not in pieces. Just a word with regard to the reason for the joy in the Acts of the Apostles, which is coming through here. It is linked with the power that they have been in contact with, because the whole thrust of the Acts of the Apostles is the oomph coming from the Holy Sepulchre. That first shock which goes round the Mediterranean basin like wildfire, transmitted contagiously. They had met him. They noticed that they had been with Jesus. And that drive sent them also to the equivalent of the gallows in its various forms. Even John, who was writing this gospel, it seems was martyred twice, but he was kept alive both times by angelic power. You know the stories of his being boiled in oil and all that. Because the Lord wanted him to transmit at the end of his life the fruit of his meditation. But these were in contact with precisely that same presence which breaks through in the bread of life at the moment when it comes here in our midst. It is that same shock. And indeed, the Patriarch of Jerusalem has commented on that I think it's the current one actually, that the shock received at the igniting of his candle in the Holy Sepulchre on Holy Saturday is very similar to what happens at the celebration of the sacred mysteries when there is that breaking through of divine power. It is the same power, the difference being that we do not see normally. But we need, nevertheless, to be aware that it is that same power which conquered the pagan world and which we have in our hands. And it is there as a serene reminder to anyone who questions faith that it can actually now, with modern means, clearly and calmly and ponderately be proven. If one looks at the YouTubes, recent ones, on all that has been done in recent times now with regard to the Holy Shroud of Turin, it is beyond the shadow of a doubt. And not only that, but we know that the moment in which this imprint came was something beyond the grasp of science, and that some mysterious force, similar to what created the world out of nothing, was there in one fraction of a second. And also that the moment in which it was left there forever in the print, which is actually just behind you in miniature there, it happened in a state of suspension. You can study it and we can see that for it to be perfectly preserved without a single pleat or fold on both sides, it had to be in suspension. The body was in the air at the moment in which it was left. So that is the power that we have right now as we repeat the words of the Last Supper. God explodes. Alleluia, sing to Jesus, He's the scepter, He's the throne. Alleluia, He's the triumph, He's the victory alone. Hark the songs of peaceful Zion thunder like a mighty flood. Jesus out of every nation has redeemed us by His blood. Alleluia, not as orphans are we left in sorrow now. Alleluia, He is near us, faith believes, nor questions how. And a cloud from sight received Him when the 40 days were o'er. Shall our hearts forget His promise? I am with you evermore. After hearing of the latest reports from Turin, what happened on the night that left this mark upon the unmarked columns of a page of shelved, unfiled, locked science? What strange spark that starred beyond dimensions of our age did wander from beyond's own land and walk into our time? What did it do in this its ancient mischief? Do we stand beside an imprint of a world, but passing through? wizards say that ultra all-thing force, a second split to atoms, must have come our sleepy way. That 'twas the intercourse of utmost inner night that left this numb. And yet, unshred, neath tearing of a pain so huge that were it known, 'twould worlds explain.